as I was saying, thank you for the nice introduction. Thank you for the invitation. And today I would like to tell you a story of the work that I've been developing with my team at the University of Lisbon, and of course with the help of many other collaborators. And by the end of it, I hope to have successfully convinced you that biomedical ontology alignment is a key piece of the puzzle to unlock artificial intelligence biomedical applications. So my outline for today, and of course, so my outline for today, first, a quick intro on why biomedical AI needs ontologies and why one ontology is not enough for this, and what are the challenges when we want to align and integrate multiple ontologies. Then in the second part, I will tell you about a few works on how we are tackling those challenges. And finally, in the third part, how can AI benefit when we have those multiple ontologies successfully integrated? So why biomedical AI needs ontologies? So perhaps I do not need to convince you that biomedical ontologies are essential for biomedical research. But as you probably well know, there is a world of people out there working on applying AI and machine learning to biomedical data that either have no clear idea of what ontologies are, or if they do, they only think of them as a controlled vocabulary and not something that can help their work in biomedical AI. However, if you do a quick search and read surveys and position papers about biomedical AI in very well-known magazines and scientific journals, you will see four challenges that keep propping up, presented as what is keeping AI from being more successfully adopted as a tool in biomedical research. So these four challenges, so large amounts of data that are in non-standard formats, which of course they need to be converted and merged into readable formats. And then that biomedical data is heterogeneous and complex, and current machine learning approaches are processing it without taking that context into account. Moreover, that in some use cases, there is no sufficiently large data sets to train deep learning tools, and deep learning is one of the big revolutions in the AI of the last few years. And finally, that these high performance machine learning and AI approaches lack explainability. So they work as black boxes and they cannot explain how they arrived at a specific prediction or AI outcome. But ontologies can actually be the key to tackle all of these challenges. And when I say I say ontologies, emphasis on S, plural. So ontologies, multiple ontologies, are key to tackle all of these challenges. So why is one ontology not enough? Why do I stress the S? Because biomedical research is increasingly multi-domain and holistic. When you look at systems biology, systems medicine, personalized medicine, all of these areas require a combination of, on one hand, high granularity, so this ability to describe a single domain in sufficient detail to support a more thorough analysis, but also of a broad scope. So you need to cover multiple domains and do this from different angles, from the molecular level up to the population level, um, to describing, natural phenomena, but also the research methods that allow you to investigate those natural phenomena. And no single ontology can do this, and moreover, no single ontology should. So a couple of years ago, we did this survey on best practices and ontologies in systems medicine, and we have a treasure trove out there of ontologies that cover all of these areas in sufficient detail. So we already have those high quality ontologies that cover well-defined domains. But what we need for this holistic representation is to find a way to intertwine them and build this overall integrative view that fits a particular research goal. So what do we need to create these holistic representations? So I think that we need to tackle three main challenges. So we need to cover multiple domains. We need to ensure a rich semantic integration, but we also need to make sure that the alignments that we are generating are high quality so that they are probably going to support high stakes application, either in biomedical research or in clinical applications. So they need to be high quality. So in the first challenge, to cover multiple domains, this means that we actually need to align multiple ontologies. And this needs to be addressed not just in the multi-domain challenge of covering different areas, but also in terms of scalability, because biomedical ontologies are very large, at least as ontologies go. So, and the second challenge, to ensure a rich semantic integration, we need to tackle this challenge that we are trying to integrate domains that are not equal. They are related, but they are not the same. So this means that we need to find these complex relations that involve more than one ontology in establishing these rich semantic links between the ontologies. And finally, we need to provide these high quality alignments. And no matter how good your algorithmic approaches are going to be, this will probably in the end mean that you need to support human interaction. And this brings with it two challenges. So you need to allow your human expert to understand the context of a link between ontologies, but you need to do so while balancing informativeness and cognitive overload, because we are talking about very large ontologies covering complex domains. So you need to find a way to strike this balance between giving enough information for the human expert to make a good decision without overwhelming them. So what do we have right now in this sense? So on one hand, we have ontology alignment, a well-established research area. Ontology alignment systems aim to find the optimal set of mappings of the links between two ontologies. So for instance, they are very good at finding links between things that have the same name. So this is one of those obvious mappings. They are also very good at finding links between concepts that have a similar name or a similar meaning. And BioPortal has a very large repository of these kinds of mappings. And on the other hand, we have logical definitions. So ontologies define logical definitions for their concepts. So this means that you can have a formal definition of a concept that is built by combining concepts from other ontologies. So for instance, in this example, hearing impairment is equivalent to this construct that intersects a number of classes from other ontologies, so decreased rate, sensory perception of sound, abnormal, to build this formal definition for the human phenotype class hearing impairment. So this looks good, right? So we have here two amazing sources of rich semantic links between ontologies. Well, but actually, maybe not so much. So on one hand, we can go to BioPortal and we find, okay, 55 million mappings between nearly 1,000 ontologies. Now, this is impressive, right? So you have 14 million classes and 55 million mappings, sorry. So 14 million classes and 55 million mappings, and you're like, okay, we're set to go. This is solved, it's done. But actually, it's not. So of these 55 million mappings, 2/3 are made by naive string matching by having either the same URI or the same label. And another third is extracted by UMLS, by concepts that are mapped through the UMLS. So actually 97% of these mappings that are in BioPortal are considered to be a SCOS-close match or a SCOS-related match, which doesn't give you that much of a high quality mapping or even that much of a semantic richness. Okay, so now let's look at logical definitions. Okay, semantic richness, right? But actually, 90% of the ontologies that have complete logical definitions only have them for 5 to 15% of their classes in the ontology. So a few of them have a lot, but most have very little coverage for logical definitions. So all logical definitions are also not going to get us there. But you can say, but okay, but we have state-of-the-art OM systems, right? Ontology matching systems. I developed one. So they should be the answer, right? Well, however, they are very good at aligning biomedical ontologies. So for instance, ontologies in anatomy, we are reaching 94.1 F measure, biodiversity a little bit less, and for large biomedical ontologies, and this means FMA, NCIT, SNOMED CT, we have a bit of a lower F measure, but still good, quite impressive, right? The problem is that these are just simple equivalencies. So this means that we are looking at mappings that find equivalent classes across ontologies and just for a pair of ontologies. So for instance, in this example, there is a hidden mapping. Fever due to infection can be equivalent to a complex class that intersects fever and infection, but state-of-the-art OM systems can't find them yet. So bioportal is not enough, logical definitions are not enough, state-of-the-art OM systems are not enough to create this holistic representation. So how can we tackle the challenges in aligning and integrating multiple biomedical ontologies? And just give me a short second. And so, first of all, there's one problem. So we still have to tackle the classical challenges in biomedical ontology alignment. So we still need to tackle that they're large size, rich and complex vocabulary, that they have different modeling views that are not always reconcilable. But I won't really target them today, although they are still a factor to consider. What we need to think is to think about this new paradigm for biomedical ontology alignment that's going to require to cover multiple domains, to ensure rich semantic integration, and to provide high quality mappings. And this forces us to rethink ontology alignment. So pairwise ontology alignment is no longer enough. So we need to think about scope and scale. And so we need to evolve towards a holistic ontology alignment approach that is able to align multiple ontologies. Simple equivalences are also no longer enough. So to tackle the differences in domains between the diverse ontologies and ensure rich semantics, we need to evolve towards complex ontology alignment. And finally, laborious user validation is no longer enough. We need to rethink user validation and facilitate expert involvement, aiming to a true human-in-the-loop interaction. So how are we doing that? So first, we focused on one question. So can we ensure the scalability of ontology matching tasks when we need to align many ontologies? And we targeted this with an approach for holistic matching that combines clustering and incremental matching. So what we did is that we did this experiment. We had 28 ontologies from the personalized medicine area, and we used our state-of-the-art ontology matching system, Agreement Maker Lite, to perform pairwise matching between all ontologies, resulting in 378 alignment tasks. But at the same time, we developed this alternative approach for holistic matching that starts by still running 378 alignment tasks, but just using a fast and high precision lexical matching algorithm. So here we are doing sophisticated matching that takes a long time. Here we are doing matching in linear time that generates just anchor mappings between the ontologies. So we take these pairwise alignments and we build an affinity matrix that allows us to cluster the ontologies according to their semantic overlap. And then we tried two different approaches. Within each cluster, we performed pairwise matching with AML sophisticated matching algorithms, or we did incremental matching, which means that first we join the two ontologies that have um, the highest overlap in semantic scope, and then we added the third and the fourth, so on and so forth, until all of the cluster was aligned. And so this resulted in, instead of having 117 matching tasks, we only have 24. And then the alignments are merged and we get to the final alignment. So what do we get from this? We get a holistic matching approach that runs in half the time, ensures high recall within similar domains, and high precision across domains. So here you can see the similarity matrix between all of 28 ontologies, and you can see in this heat map a few clusters that can be formed. And here you see that our incremental clustering approach plus the anchoring actually takes half the time of just running everything pairwise. And what we achieve is that within the clusters, we are using those sophisticated matching algorithms. So we have high recall and high precision. But between clusters, we just run the targeted lexical alignments that just give us high precision across the domains in much less time. So we looked at covering multiple domains at the scalability and holistic matching, but how about going beyond simple equivalence matching? So here I would like to talk about 3 different flavors of complex matching. When we have two ontologies that have a similar domain but different granularity, we can perform subsumption matching, where one class is a subclass of another class in another ontology. If we have two ontologies that have the same domain but a different model, we may need to combine classes from one ontology to match to a class in another one. But we also have compound matching when we have multiple ontologies and different domains, and we can combine classes from multiple ontologies in a complex class that matches a class in a target ontology. So how have we been tackling this challenge? So for complex matching, we have been working with targeted pattern mining. So our question was, can we improve the performance of complex ontology matching by using targeted pattern mining based algorithms? And the idea here is that when two ontologies have a shared set of instances, we can use those instances to calculate support for mined rules and use association rule mining to find what are the rules that have a better support and then can be used to generate a complex matching. So our idea here was, instead of just using association rule mining blindly, what we did is that we developed specific patterns for complex matching and then calculated the support for those specific patterns, generated the association rules, and then through refinement and filtering produced the final alignment that is more effective, since we are not using association rule mining blindly, because we are optimizing search and selection for each specific pattern, and more efficient, faster, because we reduce the search space that is needed to produce these rules and mappings. And what we found, and just a quick caveat here, there is no complex alignment reference in the biomedical domain. So we just evaluated in another domain, okay, in the conference domain. And what we found is that our methodology finds good precision mappings with an average precision of 75, but it also finds many mappings that were not in the reference alignment. So there is this potential to find new knowledge that even human curators were not finding in their own ontologies. And now for the other challenge of compound matching, we are focusing on ontology triples. So the idea or the question here is, can we find mappings involving multiple ontologies just by using lexical approaches and search space pruning? So our idea is that we are focusing on ontology triples, where the combination of classes from two ontologies is going to be equivalent to a class from a third ontology. So in our first step, we do a partial word matching and find links between the source ontology and one of the target ontologies. So here we mapped aortic to aorta, from the human phenotype ontology to FMA. And then we filter unmapped classes. So human phenotype classes that did not have a map in FMA are disregarded. We remove the word that was already mapped, and we run the second step where we do again the word mapping, but against the second ontology. And in this case, we match stenosis to constricted, and then select the best scoring mappings according to similarity metrics. And what we do here is that we weight the contribution of each word to the final similarity by its evidence content. So if a word is used a lot in an ontology vocabulary, we are going to give it a lower weight. So for instance, structure, disease, disorder, those are words that are part of many labels and they don't carry a lot of meaning, so they have a lower weight in our strategy. And what we found was that our complex matching approach finds mostly high precision ternary mappings, but also many new mappings. So what we did was we used this complex matching ternary approach to create logical definitions and see if we could recreate the logical definitions for a number of Bio-Ontologies. And what we found out is that, with the exception of the mammalian phenotype ontology, we have a very good precision and we find a lot of new mappings that are also correct. And finally, for our third aspect, supporting the contextualized ontology alignment validation has been one of our targets. So we have developed a tool for the visualization of ontology alignments that is graph-based. And the idea is that the graph is going to give you the necessary context to decide whether a mapping is true or not. And in a user evaluation, we found out that actually users prefer to use graph validation and graph interactivity functionalities of the tool. And not only they prefer them, they also use them more when validating alignments. But running user evaluations with domain experts is a challenge. And we are still very far from achieving true human in the loop interaction in this sense. So for the third and final part of my talk, I would like to tell you of how AI can benefit when multiple ontologies are successfully integrating. And I'm going to talk about three works in this area. So the first work is about predicting gene disease associations. So our idea was, okay, if we have genes and diseases that are annotated with a human phenotype ontology, can we use that to predict their association? But moreover, if we include another ontology, such as the gene ontology, and explore logical definitions between them, how does that impact the prediction of gene disease associations when using machine learning and knowledge graph embeddings? So we built a number of different knowledge graphs with the human phenotype ontology, adding the gene ontology, adding the logical definitions. We calculated a number of different knowledge graph embeddings approaches combined with different vector operations approaches and ran supervised learning over these embeddings and compared it against non-machine learning approaches based on classical semantic similarity or knowledge graph embedding similarity via cosine similarity. And what we found is that, yes, by having an extra ontology and by increasing the richness of the links between those two ontologies, we can improve the performance of gene disease association predictions. And you see here that although the improvements are not very large, they are there. And perhaps more interestingly, for the two best performing knowledge graph embeddings approaches that we used, we saw a little bit of a different behavior. So for RDF to VAC, we saw that both precision and recall increased, but for OPA to VAC, precision remained mostly stable, and it was in recall that we observed the most gains. So there is some evidence that adding more richness to the graphs actually increases the recall of these approaches. So the second work is about supervised, or about the idea of supervised semantic similarity. So a knowledge graph can describe several semantic aspects when it uses different ontologies to describe the data, or the ontologies themselves have different semantic aspects, such as the gene ontology with biological process, molecular function, and cellular component. And so in this strategy, we select specific semantic aspects within the ontology, calculate semantic similarity geared towards those semantic aspects. And then what we do is that we tailor a semantic similarity to a specific biological perspective. In this case, sequence similarity, PFAM similarity, or OMIM phenotypic series similarity in the case of genes. And we use these similarity proxies to tailor supervised semantic similarity to them. And what we found out is that taking into account the different semantic aspects and tailoring their combination using supervised approaches can capture these biological aspects with more accuracy. So here, for instance, we have a higher Pearson's correlation between PFAM similarity for the Resnick batch match average semantic similarity if we have a supervised approach. And the same is true for gene phenotypic similarity, although the increase is not so pronounced for the best match average for Resnick. For instance, for SIM-GIC, we see a marked increase in Pearson's correlation. And finally, for my final use case, it's about explainable AI for personalized oncology. And we have been working in a project where knowledge graphs and explainable AI methods are combined to help in personalized oncology drug recommendations. And our view here is that we build this knowledge graph using ontology matching and semantic data annotation approaches. The knowledge graph can be used for feature generations for AI, and the AI predictions can be placed back into the knowledge graph, encoded in the knowledge graph, to support explanatory mechanisms. So let's see in a little bit more detail how this works. So we have the patient has a number of features that are associated, and the AI black box made a drug recommendation. And now we want to explain this recommendation. We need this shared context. And of course, we are going to use ontologies and build a knowledge graph to afford this shared context. So now we have this large knowledge graph that describes patients and also includes the AI recommendations for patients. And it includes data from different domains. And now how can we use it to support explanatory AI? Well, actually, ontologies support 3 of the natural human understanding mechanisms: reasoning, asking questions, and thinking about similar things. So in these 3 aspects, reasoning, querying, and similarity modeling, if we look back at our example, we can use the knowledge graph to find potential lines of reasoning. So the patient has a mutation in the MET oncogene, which promotes tyrosine kinase activity, which is actually inhibited by sunitinib, which is the drug that the AI recommended. And if we can't find this line of reasoning, we can still calculate the similarity between different patients. So if you have a patient that was already treated with the same drug that was recommended, and we have an outcome for that patient, then we can use the knowledge graph and the ontologies to calculate the similarity between the patients to afford an explanation. So what is next? What could we as a community be working towards in this sense? So it is my belief that we should be placing biomedical ontologies front and center of the biomedical AI so-called revolution, because biomedical ontologies are a treasure trove that is only recently being explored by AI approaches, and biomedical ontologies can do more, and we can do more, and more is better. Going back to our first 4 challenges, so the large amounts of data that cover non-standard formats and need to be integrated. So we need multiple ontologies because true interoperability needs to cross domains. Regarding heterogeneous and complex data and machine learning approaches that are blind to this context, well, context needs to be semantically rich and needs to cover these domains. So we need to find a way to richly integrate the ontologies. And then the lack of sufficiently large data sets to train deep learning in some scenarios. Well, machine learning applications can benefit from the added layer of knowledge that comes from multiple domain rich semantically integrated ontologies. And finally, the lack of explainability. Ontologies naturally support human explanatory mechanisms of reasoning, querying, and similarity. So my acknowledgements go out to many people with whom I have worked with over the years. Danielle, Isabel, Ernesto, Daniela, Patrick, Valentina, Buma, and of course to many past and present students without whose work none of this would have been possible. If you would like to know more about our work, you can go to our website. We have 2 GitHub repositories for all of the data mining projects and about the ontology matching projects, or you can just follow me on Twitter or send me an email. And I would welcome any questions that you have at this point.
So thank you so much, Katia, for this very inspiring presentation talk. Are there any questions in the audience? Let me check. I think Nicholas has one. Nicholas Matenzoglu. Nicholas, maybe you can just speak up, because I cannot see a question, a specific question, just that you raise your hand.
Oh, no, no. Yeah, thank you very much, Katia. That's an excellent talk. And I have many different questions about many aspects of it, and I just want to ask one here in the context now. Do you have any? Do you want to expand a bit about what you see in the future, the role of the human in the kind of so we are both very involved in like trying to improve biomedical, so like mappings and. I'm just. Do you have any more thoughts about like where exactly and how exactly you see the role of the human in the loop as part of these kind of systems that potentially need to deal with like hundreds of thousands of different mappings? So how do we like? As far as my projects go, in any case, we have not even enough resources to review, let's say, 1,000 mappings. So how do we? Where exactly do we both best utilize the experts that can review such mappings?
Okay, so thank you for the very interesting question. That is something that that we have been thinking of how best to tackle, because experts don't have time to review the mappings. So what we have been working on is on how to find smart ways to identify what are the mappings that, by presenting them to the users, the system, the ontology alignment system, can gain the most information that can then be propagated to the validation of other mappings. And this may mean mappings that were found by the same types of algorithms, or mappings that share the same types of properties. Okay, this is still ongoing work, so we don't have yet, but we have worked on interactive matching before. I mean, I didn't have time to talk about everything, as you might well understand. And we have been worried about these 2 things. So what is the best mapping to show to an expert that could drive the ontology alignment process, and on the other hand, mappings in the gray zone. Okay, so sometimes you have mappings that, you have very high scores for them. You have very good evidence for them, either from background knowledge sources or from very good scores using different ontology matching algorithms. But for those mappings that are in the gray zone next to a threshold, so they have scores, so they might be right, but they have scores that are as good as mappings that are probably wrong. How can you go pick those out of the gray zone is also another challenge, arguably a harder challenge. And so our idea here is two things. So one is that nowadays user involvement is mostly validation, right? You run your algorithm and then at the end you ask an expert to validate, X mappings. Okay, maybe you choose the ones that have a lower score. But by developing this approach of the human in the loop, you potentially can show fewer mappings and achieve the same good results as you would by showing hundreds of mappings to be validated to an expert.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we have more questions on the Q&A. Because we are very few people, maybe I could suggest that maybe Sania, that is the first one on the chat, you can yourself ask Catia your question. Otherwise, I can do it, no problem. So Sania is saying, Sania is a PhD student at the University of Pittsburgh, and she's saying, thank you for the talk. This is great work. And asking, are you also working on aligning UMLS concepts to ontologies based on holistic matching or semantic similarity? And do you think these would have similar challenges?
Okay, so thank you for the question, Sania. I would say that we do not discriminate. So we don't really focus too much whether the ontologies that we are working on are part of the UMLS or are OBO ontologies. So so just to give you an example, in our work for the personalized oncology AI recommendations, we are using ontologies that are a part of UMLS, and we are also using OBO ontologies, and we apply the same holistic matching or semantic similarity measures across those ontologies. So we don't really differentiate where the ontologies are organized or on which umbrella they fall into. I don't know if that was your question or if you have another comeback, Sania.
She says, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for the question.
Yeah. So next question is done by Cesar Bernabé, that he's a PhD student at the LUMC. Maybe Cesar wants also to speak up. Otherwise, I can do it. So he's saying, thank you for the great talk. And as a question, have you in your research investigated the impact of upper level ontologies, such as BFO, and on your methods? And can you share your thoughts about it?
Okay, that is a great question, Cesar. Thank you very much. So actually, we don't work directly on exploring the impact of upper level ontologies for two reasons. First is that many of the ontologies that we work with don't implement BFO as an upper ontology, or maybe just one of the ones that we are trying to integrate does. And so we are sometimes we just don't have enough data to explore it very well, and the other one is mostly maybe a practical implementation of real-world ontologies aspect, which is sometimes ontologies do use BFO, but they define concepts that probably in practical terms mean the same, but use BFO differently as an upper ontology. And by enforcing BFO, we would lose coverage in our alignment, in our alignments by enforcing a BFO over these ontologies. So if they don't follow the same, they don't implement BFO in the same way, but you still want to capture those links, then that would be also a limitation in coverage. On the other hand, it's quite helpful in terms of reasoning, but you mostly see BFO being used by obo-ontologies. Obo-ontologies have this aim of being orthogonal. So in that respect, you don't have as much opportunity for ontology alignment within the OBO family. You usually take something from the OBO family and match it to something that is not under that umbrella. So that is also one of the other aspects of this issue.
Thank you, Katia. Maybe Cesar wants to add something or on your answer. Otherwise, we can move on to the next question. It's done by Marco. He's an associate professor to the LMC. I don't know, Marco, if you want to do yourself the question so I can read it. It seems that he's on stage. Perfect.
You cannot hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Interesting platform, by the way. Thank you for an excellent talk. It was really interesting. I have questions actually relate a little bit to Cesar's questions, which is maybe not a surprise because Cesar is a PhD student in our group. We learn a lot from him. So I was curious of how much of the results of what you presented is based on the information you get by adding ontologies, right? Adding ontologies also adds information, and how much is actually based on the logical structures that are in the ontologies?
Okay, that depends on the use case. Okay, it's not the same across all applications. However, I would like to argue that more information and is not distinct from logical structures. So logical structures would also be a specific type of more information, right? I would assume that more information for you is just have, concepts that cover more domains, have more granularity, but you don't have that semantic richness because you don't have more complex axioms established. That's what you mean. And then the other one, okay, how much of this comes from rich axioms and rules and the ontologies that we can explore? So two things. I think that for matching, more information is good, especially because most of the algorithms that are currently performing well in ontology matching, they use lexical information. So the more synonyms, the more labels that you have about your classes, even if you have text definitions, that is where most of the information is coming. The logical structures of the ontologies are currently used by the state-of-the-art algorithms more to refine the mapping process, to clean obvious wrong mappings rather than to find new mappings. So mostly you use the lexical information to find your candidate mappings, and then you use the logical structures of the ontologies to filter out and find a coherent set of mappings that allows you to integrate your two ontologies. For the data mining applications, I think that right now you have these two approaches, and so knowledge graph embeddings are very, very popular right now. Having more information to calculate those embeddings has been shown by us and others, Nuria's group included, that helps in performing better on this data mining application. So if you have a larger graph to run your embeddings on, that's going to be a better result. But the exploration of the logical structures by the embeddings there are some efforts towards that, but I still think that it's in its infancy. Most methods are still very much inspired by defining paths over the knowledge graphs, and those paths are, of course, composed by different logical structures in the RDF graphs or in the ontology graphs. But I don't think that the logical structure is imposing some order on how we generate those embeddings. It's just working as more information, not on constraining what you can do, which is their intention or their primary intention in an ontology. So in that sense, I would say that on the ontology matching, we do use the logical structures to constrain the search space and the mappings, but in the data mining area, that is still just in its first steps, in my opinion.
Thank you. Can I ask a
course.
small follow-up question,
Of course.
Nuria?
Yes.
So because I was also, that's also on the in the Q&A, if you would then have some recommendations for how we can be better citizens. I think one of your first graphs showed, right, but basically the bar chart, I think it always reflects good citizenships versus a lot of people not being so good citizens. But if you would have some recommendations on how you, for instance, if you say these logical structures, they do have a positive impact, how you would say we can be better citizens so that our data mining, etc., becomes better.
Okay, so if you become the perfect ontological citizens, I will be out of a job. So, but seriously now, so I think that there is always this trade-off of how much effort are we willing to input, like Nicola was saying, right? So I can't ask someone to validate hundreds of things for me. So and building the logical definitions is the same thing, right? It takes expert time, and expert time is very valuable. So I think that on the same level that we need to have this human in the loop strategies for the ontology matching, we could have that also for the logical definition, so for the complex mapping algorithms, so that we can optimize the input of the expert and maybe free the expert from the clear, boring cases and help them focus on the interesting hard cases that we can then generalize across other applications. And I think that could be a way forward. But I don't know if aiming to become completely independent of these algorithms is, and just by being a better ontological citizen and encoding everything by hand, is the way to go. I think that we need to find better uses for our time if there's an algorithm that can do it for us reasonably well, right? So, yeah. I mean, there's been a more than 20 years effort by the Bio-Ontologies community, and we have this treasure trove of rich semantic information at our fingertips that is far from being fully explored. There's a lot more to be done.
Okay, thank you.
So I think Nico is attending the stage.
Oh, I'm already there. Okay, good. Sorry. Yeah, so I have a follow-up question on your when I saw this, I was amazed that someone is working on that kind of thing. So I have no idea that you are doing this. So is there any, do you have any write-ups on your work on doing complex predictions, like the examples that you were showing between phenotypes and the kind of like composed or post-composed term sets like Pato, CL, and so on? And because this is so important for us also, like at least to get, to follow your work on this, because one of the big problems we are facing is that we have no good way, or we lack at least some methods to suggest new unpatternized, new definitions for phenotypes that we could potentially then just review and add to our ontologies as a technique to complete, let's say, our set of logical definitions. So I would be very interested in seeing some write-ups or something.
We have a paper about it that I can share with you, Nicholas.
Okay.
And we have other work that is now being put into paper format, and once it's submitted somewhere, published somewhere, I can also send it to you. But our initial work on enriching logical definitions it was published in the Journal of Biomedical Semantics a few years ago, so I can just send it to you.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Perfect.
So I have a question, Catia, regarding explainable AI. What do you think would be the most hot challenges to solve, to be applied to the medical practice?
Okay, that's a big question. Many people are working on that, and I can give you my personal ontology biased view. I warned you in my fun facts that I fell into another trap, right? I fell into the Bio-Ontologies trap. So this will be my personal view. So I think that a key aspect in explainable AI is that it's made for humans. So if we want to explain AI outcomes, we want to fulfill the same properties of human understanding. So how humans explain things to each other should be our guiding light in how we can make AI explain things to a human. And for that, there's interesting work from social sciences and psychology on how explanations between humans work. And I think that there are a few aspects of human-based explanation that ontologies can be really good at supporting. So one of them is that for two humans to be able to explain something to each other, they need a shared understanding. They need a shared language. Okay, they need to be able to communicate. Then they also need a shared context. So the assumptions, right? It's not just what you're saying, but also what's your background knowledge, where you are coming from. And I think ontologies can also give you that. Okay, they can give you the scientific context, the community agreement on a given domain. So you have this language that can be shared, you have this shared context that can be shared. And then another thing is that when you are explaining something to a coworker, to a colleague, you don't explain everything. You pick and choose some key examples that help you drive this explanation. And ontologies can be explored in many different levels with different granularity, covering different aspects. And so they can allow some tailoring of the explanations depending on what is the background of the human, the user who's reading that explanation. So the explanation for a biomedical researcher in omics, molecular biology for something may be different from the explanation that you would show for the same piece of evidence, but to a medical doctor. And by having this ability to not just have one ontology, but multiple ontologies with rich links between them, I think that you can easily support these three aspects that are properties of human understanding, and in my idea should also be the guidelines for human AI explanations.
Like a bit like the critical thinkers of AI.
I am not a critic. I am a dreamer, and I am hopeful for the many good things that AI can do for us. But um, data is, there are many flavors of data, and it's not all in tables and vectors, and people need to look at ontologies, especially in the life sciences and biomedical areas, because this community has built so much in 20 years that it is foolish to ignore it when building biomedical AI applications.
Okay, thank you. Are there more questions? I don't think so. So I have another question. You are talking about make this holistic integration of different ontologies, different domains, but then apply this into personalized medicine. How can go from holistic to personal information? Should we include logical definitions for a specific patient, or should we include the patient in the loop at some point, or what are your thoughts?
Okay, so what we are trying to do is that we are going to describe the patient within this very large knowledge graph that is combined by the 28 ontologies, and then lots of information about patient, about genes, about omics, about clinical trials, about drugs. And so we built this very large graph that is guided by the ontologies, but has all of these associated data. So I've never really thought about having a logical definition for a patient. I find that exciting. My view was for that layer to be at the ontological level, and the patient is at the instance level, and I never thought about it, but maybe there's something really interesting to do there, and I'm going to keep that idea in mind for our work, and I will acknowledge you. but so the answer very simply is no, we're not thinking about that, but that's really interesting. And the other aspect of the holistic versus the personalized. So the holistic is also personalized because it is holistic in the aspect that you are looking at all of these different facets, all of these different perspectives, but it's still personalized because in the end you can still build a kind of a personal knowledge graph for that patient, for the things that describe that patient. So you have an holistic view of the patient, but it is focused on the patient. It is personalized. It just covers many different areas: clinics, genomics, tissues, cells, drugs, etc.
And do you think we should add information from the patient somehow? This is a big challenge. But
Can you explain a little bit more about what you think is information from the patient themselves, so things that the patient says and inputs, or are you talking about demographics, lifestyle, things like that?
the former, the experience from the patient's perspective.
Okay. In this work of personalized oncology, we are not tackling that, but in another work that we have in dementia, we are tackling that. So we are tackling the inclusion of patient-reported outcomes into a personalized knowledge graph. So the idea here is that you in dementia, in the neuropsychology, you have a lot of instruments that are, questionnaire based, that you can ask your patient, to report on how they're feeling in some day, what they are doing, what they want to do, and and we are working on integrating that into a knowledge graph as well.
Yeah. I was asking this because I know also that there are a lot of text mining work on Twitter or forums from trying to capture all the information that patients maybe don't translate when talking with during the encounters with its physician, but maybe they feel more free to express themselves on the social media or other platforms, and then this information can be indeed
That is very interesting.
useful to enrich and contextualize even more in a personal way this patient knowledge. That was my idea of why I asked it.
That is very interesting as well. We just don't have a clear use case for that in our project, so we haven't really been focusing on it. But it's really interesting as well.
Yes, for example, in the case of rare diseases that people are struggling during years about discovering what is going wrong, what is a disease that they have, for example. So maybe there also would be very helpful, or to involve the patient perspective, for example.